Hospitals have a specific smell. Antiseptic and plastic, something clean that still feels like fear if you breathe it in too deeply. The ceiling lights above the gurney slid past in long white strips as they rushed me down the hallway. Someone kept saying my name. Someone else kept apologizing. I remember the squeak of the wheels, the cold of the metal rail under my fingers, the way my body felt suddenly not like mine anymore. My name is Laura. I'm 29 years old. I didn't understand how serious it was at first. Pain has a way of narrowing your world until it's just breath and brightness and the next instruction. I heard the word surgery like it was happening to someone else. Emergency. Immediate. No time. My phone was taken from my hand and set on a tray. The last thing I saw before they pushed the doors open was my mother's face. Tight, controlled, already tired. She leaned toward the rest of the family in the waiting area. Aunts, uncles, cousins shifting in their seats, coats still on. Her voice was calm. Reassuring. Almost bored. "Let's go home," she said. "She'll be okay." It landed softly, like a decision already agreed upon. Someone mentioned my cousin's birthday dinner. Reservations. A cake that had already been ordered. I watched them gather their things through the blur of medication and fluorescent light. Chairs scraped. A laugh slipped out, quick and guilty. No one looked at me directly. That would have made it harder to leave. As they wheeled me into the operating room, the doors swung closed behind us with a hollow thud. The sound echoed longer than it should have. The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward. I remember thinking how strange it was to be leaving consciousness while everyone else was heading to a restaurant. The last thing I felt was cold spreading through my arm. The last thing I heard was a machine beeping steadily, doing the job no one else stayed to do. When I woke up, the world returned in fragments. A ceiling I didn't recognize. A dull ache stitched through my body. My mouth dry, tongue heavy. Recovery rooms don't allow drama. Everything is hushed, padded, softened around the edges. Curtains instead of walls. Voices kept low as if pain could be startled awake. A nurse noticed my eyes open and smiled gently. She told me the surgery was over. He told me it went well. He told me to rest. But before I did anything else, before I cried, before I asked for water, before I even tried to move, I asked for my phone. It felt heavier than I remembered when they placed it back in my hand. My fingers shook, not from fear exactly, but from clarity arriving too fast. I unlocked the screen. The buzzing started immediately. Messages stacked on top of each other, pushing the screen upward, relentless. Missed calls. Group chats lighting up. My mother's name again and again. My aunt. My cousin. People who had decided I would be fine without needing to see it. What's going on? Please forgive us. Don't do this, please. I stared at the words while the room hummed quietly around me. Monitors beeped. A cart rattled past. Somewhere, someone laughed softly, probably relieved about something unrelated. I thought about the moment they stood up to leave. About how easily they trusted my survival to strangers while choosing celebration over waiting. About how often I had been the one who didn't need much, who didn't make scenes, who was expected to recover quietly. I didn't respond. I turned the phone face down on the blanket and closed my eyes, letting the noise fade into the background. My chest rose and fell, slow and steady. For the first time that day I wasn't being rushed. And in that quiet something shifted, not loud, not dramatic, just firm enough to hold. Whatever panic was flooding their phones now had started with a choice they'd already made. Recovery rooms blur time. Minutes stretch, then collapse, leaving you unsure how long you've been awake or how much of the world has happened without you. The curtain beside my bed swayed slightly whenever someone passed, the fabric whispering against itself. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, sharp and clean, trying its best to convince everyone that nothing bad could live here. My phone buzzed again. And again. I didn't look at it. I focused instead on the steady beep of the monitor, the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes, the distant murmur of a family laughing somewhere down the hall. Not mine. A nurse came to check my vitals. She asked if anyone was with me. The question was casual, routine, but it landed hard. I shook my head. She paused for half a second, long enough to register, not long enough to comment, and then smiled again. Professional kindness. Counted more than she probably knew. As medication settled deeper into my body, memories drifted in without warning. Me at 14, sitting in a waiting room alone while my mother ran errands she said couldn't wait. Me at 22 calling home with good news and being told they'd talk later because dinner was already on the table. Small moments, dismissed at the time, lining up now with uncomfortable precision. I'd always been the low-maintenance one. The one who didn't need hovering. The one who bounced back quickly. That story had been useful to them. It gave permission. The surgeon stopped by briefly, explaining what they'd done, how close it had been, how timing mattered. I nodded, absorbing facts without emotion. When he left, I stared at the ceiling and imagined my family around a restaurant table, candles lit, glasses raised. I wondered if anyone had checked the time. If anyone had thought about the room I was in, about the machines quietly keeping me here. My phone vibrated so hard it slid a little on the blanket. I picked it up this time not to reply, just to read. The tone of the messages had shifted. Panic had replaced confusion. Someone had heard something. Someone had assumed something worse than reality. Guilt has a way of amplifying imagination. My mother's texts were longest. Paragraphs now. She said she hadn't meant it like that. She said she trusted the doctors. She said she'd raised me to be strong. That line stuck with me. Strong in her language had always meant not needing her when it was inconvenient. Another memory surfaced. Me after a childhood illness, tucked into bed while the house carried on without me, birthday decorations going up in the other room. I'd listened to laughter through the wall and told myself it was fine. I was fine. I always was. I typed a message and erased it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Words felt dangerous in that moment. Once spoken, they would ask for responses I wasn't ready to give. The nurse returned and offered ice chips. They melted slowly on my tongue, grounding me in the present. She told me visiting hours would start later. I nodded again, knowing no one would be there when they did. As the medication thinned, something else sharpened. Not anger. Not sadness exactly. Awareness. The understanding that this wasn't about one surgery or one birthday dinner. It was about a pattern that trusted my resilience more than it respected my presence. I turned my phone off completely. The quiet that followed was immediate and complete. No buzzing. No apologies arriving too late. Just the steady rhythm of machines and my own breathing, proof that I was still here with or without witnesses. For the first time since the gurney started moving, I felt in control. Not of my body, not of the past, but of the boundary forming quietly inside me. And I knew whatever came next would not be handled the way things always had been. By the time they moved me to a regular room, the sky outside the narrow window had turned the color of wet concrete. Evening settled slowly, pressing its weight against the glass. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm linen, a combination that felt both safe and impersonal. I lay there listening to the hum of the ventilation, aware of every inch of my body, stitched and sore and undeniably alive. A doctor came in to check on me and asked gently if my family had been informed. I said yes. He nodded, satisfied, and moved on. The truth didn't require explanation. It rarely does. When I turned my phone back on hours later, it was like opening a door to a storm. Missed calls stacked in neat rows. Voicemails filled the notification bar. Messages arrived instantly as if they'd been waiting, holding their breath. My cousin wrote first. The birthday one. She said she didn't know it was that serious. She said she felt awful now. She added a heart emoji, the digital kind that tries to soften consequences. An aunt followed, then another. Each message carried the same shape: shock, regret, reassurance that no harm had been intended. My mother's messages came last. Not because she hadn't sent them, but because I'd scrolled past them earlier without reading. Now I opened one. She wrote that she'd trusted the doctors. That hospitals overreact. That she'd only wanted to keep everyone calm. She said she thought I'd hate a big fuss. She reminded me how independent I was, how I'd always handled things well. I felt the old reflex stir, the urge to reassure her, to smooth the edges of her discomfort. It rose automatically like muscle memory. I recognized it now. And I let it pass. A memory drifted in, quiet but insistent. Me at 19, sick with the flu, alone in my apartment, telling her I was fine so she wouldn't worry. Me at 26, sitting in an urgent care waiting room by myself, texting updates that minimized pain. I had taught them how to leave. The nurse came in to check my phone and asked if I needed anything. Her voice was neutral, kind. I asked for water. She brought it without commentary, without expectation. The simplicity of that exchange felt almost radical. Outside the room, someone laughed. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Life continued in parallel tracks, brushing past mine without intersecting. I realized how much of my life had been lived that way, adjacent, not central. I typed one message finally. Not long. Not emotional. I told them I was awake. I told them the surgery had been serious. I told them I needed time and space. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't soften the language. The replies came immediately. Please. Promises. My mother said she was coming to the hospital right now. I stared at the words until they blurred, then set the phone down. I called the nurse and asked about visitor policies. She explained them clearly, professionally. I thanked her. When she left, I watched the door close and felt something inside me steady itself. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't making a scene. I was choosing rest over repair. Silence over performance. As night settled in fully, the room dimmed, lights lowered to a soft glow. I lay back and closed my eyes, listening to the quiet machinery that had carried me through the worst of it. For the first time, I didn't feel responsible for managing anyone else's fear. That responsibility had always been implied, never requested. And now, finally, it was no longer mine. Morning came slowly, filtered through blinds that didn't quite close all the way. The light settled on the edge of the bed, pale and cautious, as if it knew better than to rush. My body ached in a quiet, organized way, the kind of pain that means something has been fixed even if it isn't healed yet. A nurse brought toast that smelled faintly of cardboard and butter and asked how I slept. I told her the truth. Better than expected. My phone stayed face down on the table. I could feel it there like a small engine still warm from running too hard. When I finally picked it up, the messages had softened. Fewer exclamation points. Longer apologies. My mother wrote that she was sitting in the parking lot. She said she needed to see me. She said she'd made a mistake. I breathed in and out, slow and measured, listening to the hum of the building waking up. Somewhere a cart rattled. Someone laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. I thought about how often urgency had been used to pull me back into alignment. How quickly emergencies became communal only when guilt arrived late. I asked the nurse to hold visitors until the afternoon. She nodded without question. Boundaries once named have a way of holding. When my mother finally came in, she looked smaller. Hospital light is unforgiving. It flattens bravado and highlights worry. She stood by the door for a moment, hands folded, unsure where to put herself. The silence stretched, not hostile, just honest. She started to apologize the way she always did, by explaining. I stopped her gently. I told her what it felt like to be rolled away while she chose a celebration. I told her how the room sounded when I woke up alone. I told her what it does to a person to be called strong when what they needed was presence. My voice didn't shake. Hers did. That was new. She cried. Quietly. I let her. I didn't move to fix it. We didn't resolve everything. We named some things. We left others untouched. Repair, I've learned, isn't a performance. It's a practice, and it doesn't happen on command. When she left, she asked if she could come back tomorrow. I said we'd see. It wasn't punishment. It was pacing. The rest of the day passed in small, grounding tasks. I stood for the first time. I drank water that tasted like metal and relief. I watched clouds rearrange themselves through the window. The hospital's smell, clean, insistent, slowly faded into the background. My phone buzzed once more and then went quiet as if it had learned something. If you've ever been the one who doesn't make a fuss, the one everyone assumes will be okay, you know how praise can sound like permission to leave. Some families don't abandon you. They outsource the waiting. By evening I felt steadier. Not triumphant. Just aligned. I answered one message with a single sentence. I'm focusing on recovery. I'll reach out when I'm ready. It was enough. When the lights dimmed and the room settled, I rested my hands on my stomach and listened to my breath find its rhythm. I wasn't alone in the way that matters. I was present. I was counted. I was choosing myself without needing to explain why that choice existed at all. The monitor beeped softly, patient and faithful. Outside, a siren passed and then disappeared, urgency moving on to someone else. I closed my eyes and let the quiet do its work. I chose my own recovery.